We will start with a little bit of an overview of the council's priorities in the health area, including OBVI, so that we all have some shared understanding of what our priorities are and the work that we are doing with DHS, the communications that we've been having. And then I'll turn the floor over to TR. And TR has a presentation to look at OBVI, what that work is about, other initiatives that relate to people with disabilities, and the work that DHS does, including maybe some insight into budget priorities as they're preparing their budget to pass to the governor, as we discussed that budgeting process yesterday. Then we'll open it up to the questions from you all, and just that gentle reminder that you can either put them in the chat or raise your hand, and then we'll call on you rather than just unmuting. So let's go ahead and get started. So some of you may have had the opportunity to read the council's priority document on healthcare. And if you didn't, no worries. It again is available for you on our website and in the link in the email that Kathleen sent you on Monday evening. So healthcare is of a primary importance for us in our advocacy work, because we know several things that impact the quality of life for those of us with vision impairment that are healthcare related. First of all, we know that in general, people with vision loss have less access to healthcare for a variety of reasons. Some of it is affordability. Some of it is transportation related. I know in my own life, there have been healthcare appointments that I either needed to postpone or reschedule or even cancel or miss because I ran into significant transportation issues that prohibited me from getting to the appointment on time or at all, depending on where the healthcare provider was located. Transportation and cost. And also, frankly, sometimes we have barriers to healthcare because of the healthcare providers that we interact with who aren't very comfortable working with folks with vision impairment. So while that's not an issue for the Department of Health Services to resolve, it is definitely something that becomes a barrier for folks when we encounter healthcare providers who are not comfortable interacting with us. We also know that folks with vision impairment tends to be more women with vision impairment than there are men. And sometimes that's due to the fact that we live longer. So we're more prone to age-related macular degeneration. And in general, women, as a general rule, have less access, more limited access to healthcare. So women don't do so well when we have vision impairment. And then we also know that people who are Black and people who are brown have disproportionate access to healthcare, and also are more likely to have particular vision impairments like glaucoma and diabetes related vision loss. So we have populations that are definitely more at risk for issues related to vision loss. And so having an equity filter applied to vision services and to healthcare services in general is really, really critical to make sure that we don't fall through the gaps. There's some really interesting and important work being done on the national scale through one of our partner organizations called Vision Serve Alliance. And Vision Serve Alliance is discovering through some of their studies and partners with other organizations that people with vision loss are more likely to be at higher risk for falls. And that kind of seems obvious. We often have balance issues because of either monocular or no vision, or uneven vision in each of the eyes. So we're more at risk for falls. Wisconsin has a significant issue with falls and a very high injury and death rate. So that's a significant concern. And and DHS has been doing some important work on falls prevention over the last number of years, and that work definitely impacts our population. We are also more at risk for other comorbidities like diabetes, like obesity, like heart disease, high blood pressure, and arthritis. We're also at higher risk for mental health issues like anxiety and depression. And we know now that the issues of isolation and loneliness, which many, particularly our elders living with vision loss, are subjected to extreme isolation. I think I read the other day that when we deal with extreme isolation, it is equivalent to the health risks that come with smoking about 12 to 13 cigarettes a day. So these are significant quality of life issues that impact our wellness, how good we feel emotionally and physically on a day-to-day basis, and frankly, how long we're able to continue to live in our homes safely and comfortably, and then how long we actually live, period. So the work that is done by the Department of Health Services is just so incredibly, incredibly critical to our quality of life. So some of the things that the council is advocating when we're in conversations with TR and her colleagues at DHS is that we'd like to see a continued increase in funding for the Office for the Blind and Visually Impaired, because that office, and TR will describe that office's work in more detail, is such a critical lifeline for people to learn the necessary blindness skills for living a full, safe, and vibrant life. And it is a service that is available statewide. So we want to see that increase in funding. As I mentioned yesterday, for those of you who attended, we haven't seen a significant increase in funding to OBVI on both the federal and state level in many, many years. And that has implications for how many service providers are available throughout the state. Additionally, we have concerns about Medicaid. In Wisconsin is one of the smaller number of states that does not have Medicaid expansion. And we have been asking for that in the governor's budget for a very, very long time, along with other disability and aging advocacy groups, because we know that if we had Medicaid expansion, there would be more folks just above that poverty level who would be able to access Badger care and have critical health care covered. We also will be continuing a conversation about the potential for our services that we offer through vision rehabilitation and low vision therapy and orientation and mobility to be covered by Medicaid. Currently, those are not covered. And none of the assistive equipment that many of us use, adaptive equipment that we use, is covered under Medicaid. And these become very financially burdensome to folks who don't have expendable income to buy a CCTV. And so sadly, people go without, and we will, scholarship or try to provide as best as we can, but we're a nonprofit as well. So we need compensation for the services and the goods that we distribute. So having a Medicaid provision for these highly qualified, highly trained, certified professionals would open up the possibility of greater service to folks with vision impairment. Currently, there are about 100,000 Wisconsinites, adults, that we believe are living with vision impairment, and we're pretty sure that's underreported because right now those numbers come from self-reporting. And then of those 100,000, only about 3% of people are seeking vision rehabilitation services of any sort. So we have a lot of unmet need in the state. And the last thing that I'll mention that we hope that we will be able to be in conversation with DHS about relates to the registry for babies and young children that we discussed yesterday. So as you may recall, when a baby is born or a young child is diagnosed with a significant vision loss, we want to connect that child and that family to qualified vision service professionals who are used to dealing with vision loss and used to dealing with young children for immediate support and intervention, because we know that early intervention can in some ways mitigate vision loss, and in other ways we can start teaching those vital skills right from the get-go around communication and early literacy skills. You know, little do some of us know that really literacy skills are developing in very young babies. It's not when they turn 5 and go to kindergarten. So when these babies and young children do not get those vital services right from the get-go, it puts them at a disadvantage for learning. And when we're disadvantaged for learning, we're disadvantaged for the rest of our trajectory of life. So that registry would provide and make connections between the family and qualified vision service professionals. It would be confidential, of course, and it would give the family a really important resource. So having met with a family recently who had a young baby born with significant vision loss, you know, through my family network, through my family and friends network, the family was very confused about where to go next. And even though the baby had been born in the hospital, the hospital did not make the connection. So, you know, I connected that family with Vision Forward so that they could get the connection and also know how to work with and really support their baby. So those are some of the background that I wanted to share with you, the things that we are actively engaging with DHS in conversation and hope to continue. So TR, I am really excited to have you here with us to talk a little bit about OBVI and the services that are offered there, and you know, some of the you know, the challenges that you are working through in providing service for folks with vision impairment, and kind of like, as the governor says, that kind of connecting the dots. How do we as people with vision impairment sit into, you know, the overall plans for people with disabilities and people with who are elderly in the DHS kind of network of services and programs. So the floor is yours, my friend, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Denise. I really appreciate being invited. That entire presentation that you gave, I have in my notes. And Denise is such a great example of a solid advocate. And so I have those asked, I have that background in the priorities, and I so appreciate you sharing it. Before I talk about more details about the Office of Blind and Visually Impaired here at DHS, I would be remiss if I didn't share with the group what Denise and Aaron and Michael and Ramsey and a few others already know about me. But I really love advocacy. So I am so excited to be invited to your second day of your advocacy conference or summit or time together, because I think that it's so important that sources of power and decision-making, which certainly the State Department of Health Services is one of those sources, should be held accountable, should have transparency where it's appropriate, and advocacy helps for that entire process to work. I am one of those geeks that still believe in the beauty of this experiment of the democracy and how we interact. And so, as Denise knows, I never fought advocates for being exactly and truly their good selves as advocates, which is pushing those sources of power to consider accountability, to consider change, and to be held to bear of what's happening on behalf of those that they are advocating for on behalf of. And so know that I always enjoy taking calls, and that those don't have to always be rainbows and butterfly type calls. They can also be calls where folks are asking DHS to show up on behalf of those that they're advocating for. So I have to always give that spiel. So the Wisconsin Office of Blind and Visually Impaired is housed within the Division of Public Health. So over DHS is a 6,000 person department or agency with 5 divisions, 3 offices, and about a budget of $15 billion, right? So the Office of Blind and Visually Impaired is actually housed under one of those 5 divisions, the Division of Public Health. And in that Division of Public Health, there are different bureaus and offices. And so you would find the Office of Blind and Visually Impaired in the Division of Public Health, under the Bureau of Aging and Disability Services, and within the Office for the Promotion of Independent Living. And so the reason why I kind of take the time to go through that is because it's hard to navigate, even for folks who are in DHS, where those things lie. But I also went through that so that you all can kind of understand where it fits within the larger structure of the Department of Health Services. Really lends to the way that the department has seen and does see the Office of Blind and Visually Impaired. So in the Division of Public Health, so as a public health sector, under the Bureau of Aging and Disability Services, and within the Office for the Promotion of Independent Living. And really the Office of Blind and Visually Impaired exists to enhance independent living skills and quality of life for people with vision loss. And so I'm happy to hear that alignment with what Denise shared about quality of life for those who have experienced vision loss as it relates to the comfortably living in their homes, and it relates to their wellness as a whole. And so OVI really provides independent living skills training and assistive technology training. So that's, as far as the vision or scope of that. Under the Office of Blind and Visually Impaired, some of the other services that are provided are assessments, training, information, referrals, outreach, and education. And this is really aimed at adults with vision loss, families of adults with vision loss, and interested professionals. And so I would say roughly the numbers that our team shared with me is there are 1,000 individuals who are served a year by the Office of Blind and Visually Impaired. And it's really, like I said, for that focus of the independent living skills and quality of life. I have to give a huge shout out to the advocacy of the council here in continuing to advocate for the staffing that is needed in OVI. Currently, there are 11 full-time rehabilitation specialists that provide the services in Wisconsin counties that I just listed. And recently, OVI did receive an additional full-time contracted rehabilitation specialist to the team. So happy for that one. Totally understand that that's not enough. That's why I'm glad I took my notes with the priorities you shared, and I downloaded the document, Denise. But we thank you for your advocacy in that space, and certainly attribute that additional full-time contracted rehabilitation specialist that we have to your advocacy efforts. It does work, even when it's frustrating, and it takes time for sure. So OV also has those regionally based rehabilitation specialists that I just referred to. They assist people with vision loss as well as their families. And like I mentioned, again, interested adults or interested professionals as well. And some of the work that those specialists do include making sure that folks and their families are able to achieve their independent living goals. And that can be through orientation and mobility training that those rehabilitation specialists around the state do, techniques for enhancing low vision, adaptive communication skills, use of accessible assistive technology, adaptive food preparation and nutrition, home and personal management, adjustment to vision loss, and that information and referral to community resources, which again, I mentioned is largely part of the services that the Office of Blind and Visually Impaired offers. And so it really relies on those regionally based behavioral health, rehabilitation, not behavioral, specialists that we have throughout the counties. We also collaborate with a lot of community partners. That goes back to what I said is this dynamic that I expect to happen with the advocates of pushing us further, sharing with us things that we may not be in tune to, the way that we may not understand the work, not being at the ground level or not being part of the community. And so those community partnerships are part of how advocates keep us accountable and also help to provide as an education source to those gaps that we have in order to get this work done in a way that doesn't just meet the goals on paper, but does it in a way that is culturally responsive, that is centered on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So some of those community partners include people who are blind or visually impaired, their family, and their caregivers. So having folks who are experiencing firsthand at those conversation tables in that partnership with us to inform those decisions that we have. The Department of Workforce Development is another collaborator, the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, of course, the Wisconsin Council of the Blind and Visually Impaired, thank you. Aging and Disability Resource Centers, independent living centers, area agencies on aging and local aging units, the Statutory Council on Blindness, again, local technical college occupational therapy programs, as well as senior centers and local Lions clubs are some of the ways in which at the state level and with our regional rehabilitation specialists, we really work in the collaborative space with community partner. I want to pause. I have a second piece, but I know that was a lot of information. So I wanted to pause just in case there were some immediate questions, but then I do have a second piece to share, but that was quite a bit to begin with.
Tiara, I'm wondering if you would just take a minute to talk a little bit about the Statutory Council on Blindness, its role, responsibilities. Sometimes folks confuse the Statutory Council with us, and we are very different entities, often working towards some of the same goals. But I think that folks would find that really beneficial, especially because I also know you are still looking potentially for qualified members to serve on the Statutory Council.
Yeah, I don't have much information, just as I don't directly interact with the Statutory Council on Blindness. The Secretary's office does. Karen Odegaard is our external affairs liaison here in the Secretary's office, and she works the closest with the boards. And so, you know, I will say though that I know enough to know that the reason why we have that statutory language in front of them is to say that their mission, their membership, and what drives the way they operate is by statute. And that provides a very important piece of information for advocates when you're considering the different stakeholders and the different voices that are at a table to move an issue forward. And so with them being created by a legislative body and with the way that they're structured through having to fulfill a certain statute, they certainly have a role and a place at the table, but to be distinguished, to your point, Denise, from your organization, they are not sort of operated or their vision sort of directly simply by constituents who are volunteering, right? You have a little bit of folks who have the influence of they were appointed either by the governor through the Department of Health Services or by the legislative body. And so it has more of a big P political aspect to it, even though, as I have shared with Denise, all things are small p political, right? Anything in government is political because the nature of how we are created is through those political decisions. And so that is one big difference that I would say for the board. But I can have Karen Odegaard follow up if she also has some information that could give you a better breakdown, like who's on the board or how many folks, because I just don't have that info. But it's a good question.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I didn't expect you to have the details, but I just,
Okay.
think that differentiation is incredibly helpful to
Yeah.
folks. So what I think I'm going to do is, rather than, I want to make sure that we, give you all the space that you need for your both pieces of your presentation. So let's go ahead and move to that and then open it up to questions.
Good deal. Okay, thanks, Denise. So the last part that last two parts that I wanted to share is just how OB fits into the larger DHS service model for people with disabilities, which again is part of the reason why I took all that time to break down where the Office of Blind and Visually Impaired sits within the larger, huge structure of the DHS. So DHS is really committed to continuing to partner with the Office of Blind and Visually Impaired in order to make sure that we are centering, again, solutions that are actually working for those who are most impacted and their families. And so the statute, as I've said, the Statutory Council on Blindness recently did a lot of planning for and hosting of community conversations. And so although that is not DHS directly doing that, because of that statutory nature of the, oh, Kathleen is awesome. I love the link in there. Thank you, Kathleen. Because of the relationship that we have with that council, we are certainly going to be looped into the planning and hosting that they're doing of several community conversations. And I can make sure that you all have those information of as those dates are being planned, if you don't already have that information. We would love for that council to be able to share their conversations as they're having in order to inform the strategic priorities of the department, because of the second piece that I want to get to, but not yet. We're entering into the budget cycle for 23-25, which is our next biennial budget cycle. The Division of Public Health is also working with the Office of Blind and Visually Impaired and the Statutory Council to ensure that the perspectives and experience of individuals who are blind or visually impaired is captured in our state health assessment. So that's that large assessment that we do, that we share with a lot of partners, that we share with the feds, and that informs where we go in our priorities. And so there's work underway with that Statutory Council and making sure that individuals who are blind and visually impaired are included in that state health assessment and the state health improvement plan. They kind of go hand in hand. People might have heard them being referred to as the SHA, State Health Assessment, SHA, and the SHIP, the State Health Improvement Plan, SHIP. The department is committed to continuing to advance conversations in the spaces of health equity and intersectionality of those whose voices may or may not always be present. And I really heard Denise, you speak to that as well, is that even within the group of the community of those who are experiencing vision loss, you also have those who are minoritized racially, so Black and brown people, and you also have women who have different experiences. And so that same intersectionality that you spoke to is a desire of DHS's, and working with the division and working with the Statutory Council and working with all of you to make sure that those intersectionalities are reality in the decisions and the priorities that are coming out of the office. And I would lastly say on this part that the department would want to make sure that if their current ways in which the dynamics of conversations are going have gaps to them or are not meeting expectations, that we're open to saying, how else can we open up that line of communication and that dynamic for not only you all, but individuals in general to feel like they have access to all of the things that I'm sharing. And then the last thing I will do before we can open it up to questions is take a moment to just talk about the budget process. And so Wisconsin is a state where, like others, where we have a biennium, which goes from June 30th of one year of the odd year to July 1st of the next odd year. So it's over a 2-year period. We are currently existing in our last budget cycle from Governor Evers. in this legislature, and we're preparing for the 23-25 budget cycle. So this current budget biennium will end in June 30th of 2022, and then we'll be looking to start the next biennium 23-25. And so statutorily, September 15th, that's the date that everyone wants to remember, is when agencies have to submit to the governor through the Department of Administration and specifically the state budget office what our individual budget plans are. And so that is a very internal process. For a lot of reasons, it has to stay internal. There's a lot of draft documents that aren't able to be publicized. There's a lot of information that's shared. As I said to folks, we're partners, but sometimes we have to provide some level of distance between the state in order to really be as ethical as we need to be. And so partners having certain level of information that others don't is not something we engage in. So it has a very internal feel to it. But what I'm always telling folks is to let folks know of the timeline of the budget, to say this is the time for you to be giving me the information you're giving me now and sharing with me, as we'll have that September 15th, deadline. That is certainly not the end of the budget process. It is a very long process, but that is a good marker that I like to give advocates to kind of know how early this starts. And even if we're submitting a budget to the governor for individual agencies, there's tons more back and forth that exists between the agency and the governor's office much far after that, with the governor not having to actually have a budget that he'll announce publicly until February of what will be 23. And so just to be clear on that, that is how we do it in this longer budget process that we have, and knowing that we'll be crossing over an election throughout this budget process as well. So the other thing I was going to share is that, I'm sure that the governor will do what he did in the last budget cycle, which is have some form of listening sessions in addition to the listening sessions that the legislature will put up for the next budget cycle as well.
Awesome, thank you. So a couple of questions I think, TR, that I'm guessing other folks might have. So during this period, as you're forming the budget, I know we always set a priority to visit with you and your colleagues to express our budgetary needs and desires, and really excited to hear too that there's a strategic plan underway, because that has been one of our priorities, is to see OBVI have a strategic plan to guide its work. But just curious how the average advocate, so somebody who's not part of the council, might be able to communicate with DHS during these times. The listening sessions that the Statutory Council is doing, I would imagine, is one tool, but what are the other tools available to the average Wisconsinites?
I'll be honest that I don't think that there are many explicit ones, because there isn't any statutory requirement for the department to do an external budget hearing process, right? So the legislature has that requirement, so they hold those sessions. And let me be very clear, that is still a real time for adjustments in the budget to be made. This September 15th, I would say, would probably be the advocate, 301 course, right? That's a very insider information course. I am always personally trying to always share that information because I think historically that hasn't been shared. So I just give that caveat. There's not like a formal space that is existing. What I will say, though, is that we look to our partners like Aging Disability Resource Centers, like Wisconsin Council on Blind and Visually Impaired, like the Statutory Council, to share this insider knowledge with the people that they're in community with, either providers or families, the ones who the state don't have a direct connection with, and arguably probably shouldn't, right? The state isn't necessarily doing the direct service grassroots work, but we have those who are fulfilling that. So one way is just making sure that in any community spaces that you all are in formally as the council or the individuals who are on this call, sharing is caring, share the information about the budget timeline. The second thing I would say is that as folks are experiencing or having programs that are run by the state, and whoever they may be dealing with on the very specific issues that they are having, to certainly ask that person, like, I really have some thoughts about some improvement that I want, who's a good person to talk to. And maybe it's not that direct service provider that you're dealing with from the state, but maybe it's their, supervisors, two sort of folks above them. And then I think anytime the state is doing any community conversations, that folks should join and share for sure their thoughts and opinions. And then folks should certainly go to any budget listening sessions that are happening at the governor's office and that are happening with the legislature.
Nicely said. Thank you so much. Because I know that is often a question that I hear from folks. It's like, well, how do we let DHS know? And I'm like, well, let me know. And then we carry that forward. So I think in this part of the budget process, that is really important for folks to know. Okay. I know we've got some questions that are popping up. I think Lori messaged me to say that we have a hand raised. So Lori, I'm wondering if you could help facilitate the person who has their hand raised to be able to ask their question.
Yes, thanks, Denise. I'm sorry, I can't call you by name, the person who's raised their hand, but go ahead and speak.
That's probably me. This is Billy from Hudson, Wisconsin. First of all, I want to thank the outstanding work that this council does in the statutory council on budget. But secondly, I want to hear in the article opinion, what's the biggest success that the DHS has done? I know there's a lot of them, but what's the biggest success, and how can we as advocates help with that? And also to know if the governor is going to hold virtual listening sessions this year for people that might not have transportation, because I know like 30% of Wisconsinites are non-drivers.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if there could be a hybrid option for people that want to participate in the listening sessions by phone or Zoom. Thank you.
Ramsey, thank you so much. Thanks for the lovely compliments too about all of our work. We really also appreciate what a strong advocate you are. So thank you. So a couple things that I heard in what you said that I think are really important. One is you raised the issue of how many of us are non-drivers. And so I really want to capture that, and then we'll come back to the success piece that you also raised. So yeah, yesterday we talked about 1/3 of Wisconsinites are people who do not drive, either choose not to or cannot. And many of the folks who are non-drivers are folks who are participating in DHS programs. So the non-emergency transportation, non-emergency transportation program, through Medicaid and others. And so one of the things that I think is a really excellent success, and this is one of the ways that I think the governor has communicated the importance of collaboration. And TR, I'd love to hear if you have other things to say about this. So the Department of Transportation, I think I mentioned this yesterday, formed the Non-Driver Advisory Committee, and DHS has representation on that committee, and is part of the conversation and part of the solutions about how do we, because so many transportation programs are not housed within DOT. DHS houses many of them, Children and Families houses them, DPI houses them, and how do we make sure that these transportation programs maybe can do more than one single thing or are available to many folks. So I think that collaboration and having DHS at the table in these conversations, while we won't see the immediate impact of that as non-drivers, it is something that is really shifted in how the state is doing business with that's really important collaboration. So yeah, so I really wanted to call that out. TR, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
I would just say it's good to hear you, Ramsey. I agree with Denise. You're an awesome advocate. And I also agree with your shout out and good vibes for the council of being such good advocates. Denise, you hit the nail on the head. I think that's definitely part of all of that you named as part of the dynamic going on. And I do imagine, Ramsey, that the governor office will do those budget listening sessions again. Last cycle, I was in the governor's office, so I had more details, but I'm not anymore. And so I can't speak to the details yet, but I just, knowing them and how they've always shown up, I'm sure that would happen. And I misspoke earlier. I should be clear that this current budget ends June of 23, not 22. And so that's why you have this, that timeline, which my other dates are correct in the timeline, but I was speaking too fast, so.
That's all right. We're glad that we don't have to rinse and repeat quite yet. So,
Right.
All right. Thank you. Lori, are there other questions that folks have posed or have hands up for?
Just where will we be able to find a schedule of those listening sessions? I know they're not set yet, but where can we look for that?
Typically,
go
sorry,
ahead.
Denise.
No, go ahead.
Typically, the governor's office would do a press release, and I recognize press release goes to people who are looking for them or kind of in the know. And so typically their external affairs office would also try to share that press release with other community organizations and partners to get the word out. And then there's always typically some sort of website that the governor's office creates for the budget, where folks can find the list of that, and it'll link it to it in the communications that they put out about it.
One of the things that we will continue to do is to put out our advocacy alerts. So yesterday, and I want to encourage today, if you are not signed up for our advocacy e-news, to either send us an email at info@wcblind.org, call us, or sign up directly on our website. And when we have advocacy alerts to do, in addition to that once a month e-news, and the governor's listening sessions would be one of those things that would qualify as an advocacy alert. We would push those out for all of you, and then you would have the instructions on where to go to get more information and how to sign up. In the past budget cycles, those were conducted remotely on Zoom, which really allowed everybody in the state to participate if they so chose. The other thing that those advocacy alerts are so good for is when we are working a bill through the Senate or the Assembly, and we need your advocacy, or when we have information that we know is really useful to you all, we issue those. So you're not going to get inundated in your inbox with them, but you will get them. And then it really opens the door for you as advocates to take action. And I think I heard a question come in the chat.
You did. I just also, Kathleen put a link to our, the info at wcblind.org for people to sign up for the council's own advocacy e-news that comes out monthly. So, and yes, Chuck, if you would like to unmute, you raised your hand.
Yep. Good afternoon. My question is, are there any statistics that show that by providing these services for people that are visually impaired, that it saves, not only does it improve the quality of life because they can maintain independent living, but also there's a financial benefit for the state for all of this, so that they don't have to go to assisted living any sooner than possible?
Yeah, that's I can speak to it first if you'd like, and then hand it off to you, Chuck. It's an excellent question. So one of the things that is true is that we have limited data about folks with vision impairment. And for those of us in the field, it is of grave concern. And, you know, data, people have to know that it's an issue in order to have the interest in compiling and gathering the data. And it has limited us in some of our advocacy efforts. Yeah. It would be a really important thing. We know anecdotally that when someone can live safely at home, they're not moving into the long-term care, pipeline. And we know that we've got a long-term care worker shortage, and we know that that's a crisis. So we know that anecdotally. We don't have a ton of data on it, and it's one of the reasons that the council will be working with other vision serving agencies to do some data work, which I'll be sharing more about as the details come together. But we're in desperate need for data. And I know that DHS also maintains data. And again, having the, the power to gather it, some of the data on vision, vision disabilities, vision loss. I know on the DHS website hasn't been updated for a while. That data collection is definitely a place where we need to put our efforts. So TR, do you have more that you want to share about the data issue?
I would just say broadly, data is certainly an advocacy tool. I would say that the way that the Department of Health Services shows up in state government, it is certainly a way that we can persuade, but that type of data is most persuasive from advocates, stakeholders, providers, those who are experiencing blindness or vision loss, or their families. Because typically the policy arguments that we're making to support our budget to the governor that then gets included in his budget is not in the same way where we would have sort of a dialogue to present. We do have evidence-based practices that informs, but especially since we currently have a level set of where we spend money at, is that I think that type of question that you asked, Chuck, and getting that answer would certainly, for the lack of a better word, hit differently if it's coming from you or advocates, maybe not you specifically, to the legislature once they get the governor's budget and they begin to debate it in a way that may not always be opportune for DHS to share a statistic like that in the way that we put together our budget documents.
Excellent.
There's one more question that I think we maybe didn't answer from Ramsey was, what are some of DHS's biggest successes, and how can the advocates help to make sure that those successes are shared?
Awesome. Thanks, Lori.
Yeah, I would say, it's hard in state government when you want to define successes because there is always more that can be done, particularly when you're talking about starting from a place where there is a lot of opportunity and has not always, been given the type of resources. But I do consider it a success for us to have that additional position of the regional rehabilitation specialist, particularly in a overly, I would say, big P political sort of power dynamic between the legislature and the governor's office that was fueled by the global health pandemic, right?
Mhm.
Where the questions of money, how it's used in finances, and what is an overreach or appropriate use of the state's authorities during an emergency made a lot of other issues have way more big P politics burden on them than normal. And so I think an approval in a generally small c conservative, fiscally conservative environment that we've been in outside of what the federal government has done, but our state, legislators have been on the fiscal small c conservatism, that having been able to get an additional position field is certainly a win. And I would say the resiliency and adaptability of the Office of Blind and Visually Impaired and the staff is a huge win. Again, it doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities for improvement, but I truly appreciate those who are working there. Anne and Amber Mullet come to mind, but I know the full team who are working really hard in these different times and different administrations where they've given different level of resources and they've still been committed to the work and pushing and poking at even the structures of power within DHS to make sure that happens. And so that is how I would say some successes. And the ways that advocates can help is the more education that you all have, like was presented today with Denise and the team here, about how Wisconsin government works, and knowing that in order to be able to push what I call power mapping, those positions of power exactly where they need to happen. So it's a combination of working with DHS to understand where our gaps are at, things that we can improve on, so you can educate us on that and we can have that information, while at the same time being that voice that is heard differently from the legislature than DHS talking to the legislature, are all ways that advocates can help move this work forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we are just about at 1 o'clock. So Lori, let me check to see if there are any last questions.
There are no hands raised or questions in the chat anymore.
Okay. Wow, thank you. First of all, TR, I want to just extend a lot of gratitude for your preparedness, your candor, and really a wealth of information. I think it creates such a strong bridge from, kind of that insider, what those of us, who have the privilege of interacting with you regularly, to our wider community to understand your role and what DHS does, and how we can support you all and influence that. So really outstanding. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And if I can, I wanted to give a positive vibe from the box, Denise, before I go. Is there enough time? Okay.
Absolutely.
So Denise and Michael, I think, and maybe even Ramsey, know about my positive vibes box. So, we're all in public service, and at times we always don't get the thanks, because people are like, that's your job, you're an advocate, or you're in public service, that's what you should do. So sometimes we have to encourage ourselves. So I have this box of positive vibes. There are songs, there are jokes, there are quotes, anything that makes people feel good, and people contributed through it, not just at DHS, but like the jobs I've had for the past 10 years. And so I'll pull a positive vibe out of the box to share with you all before I go here. Oh, I think I got 2, so it must mean I get to pick. Oh, this is a good one. This one says, so often in life, things that you regard as an impediment turn out to be great and good fortune. And that is a quote by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, our former US Supreme Court Justice. And then the second one, maybe it was meant for me to do both, that I got here. Oh, I don't know if I could read the handwriting. In order to be irreplaceable, one must always be different. So be different. And that is by Coco Chanel. So those are my 2 good vibes for you all for your day and the rest of your advocacy session. It's always good to see you, Denise. Thanks for having me and being so gracious.
Yeah, you bet, TR. Thank you so much once again for those great positive vibes. I love that. That was fantastic. You know, and I think so often vision impairment and vision loss gets framed as a negative. And I know for me, it's one of the really powerful filters by which I move through the world. So yeah, thank you. So
Yeah.
I also want to do a big shout out to the team that made this happen. So our excellent support with our public liaisons, Michael Blumenfeld and Aaron Fabrizius. They, you know, really help make our connections and our on the ground ears in the Capitol and in the state agencies. So much thanks to them. And then much thanks to our staff team. So Bob, who you met in introduction, our communications director, Lori, our fund development director, who facilitated the questions, Kathleen Callan, who you've been meeting via email, who has done registrations and really helped with the logistical details to make this a success, and then Mitch Bry, who has been managing all the Zoom controls to make sure that this really comes off beautifully, because without that, we won't be here. So I'm excited to gather with you tomorrow to talk about the accessibility of state websites. And so we will see you same time at noon, and please use the Zoom link that you were sent for that session. So be well, everybody. See you tomorrow.